The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Kensington Palace, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Catherine Middleton, known to the world as Kate, stood quietly in her private study, holding a cup of tea that had grown cold in her hands. The steam had stopped rising 20 minutes ago, but she hadn't noticed. Her mind was elsewhere, focused on the weight of what lay ahead. Outside her window, she could see the early morning joggers in Hyde Park, their breath visible in the crisp London air. Normal people living normal lives, she thought. How different. Her world had become since that autumn day at St. Andrews University when she first met William. Back then, she was just Kate from Berkshire, studying art history and working part-time at a clothing store. Now she was the Duchess of Cambridge, wife to the future King of England, and mother to the future heir to the throne. The palace staff moved quietly through the corridors, preparing for another day of royal duties. Kate had grown accustomed to their silent efficiency, the way they appeared and disappeared like ghosts, ensuring everything ran smoothly without ever intruding on the family's privacy. Today felt different, though. There was an electricity in the air, a sense that something important was about to happen. William had left early that morning for a private meeting with his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth. He had been unusually quiet at breakfast, pushing his eggs around his plate while George chattered about his upcoming school project, and Charlotte practiced her reading aloud. Little Louis had been his usual cheerful self, completely unaware of the tension that seemed to hang over his parents like a cloud. Kate had wanted to ask William about the meeting, but something in his expression told her to wait. After nearly 2 decades together, she had learned to read his moods like a familiar book. This wasn't the time for questions. This was the time for patience and understanding. The children had been whisked away to their various activities by their nanny, leaving Kate alone with her thoughts. She walked slowly through the rooms of their apartment, remembering the early days of their marriage when everything felt overwhelming. The constant scrutiny, the protocols, the weight of representing not just herself, but the entire monarchy. There had been moments when she wondered if she was strong enough for this life. Her phone buzzed softly on the mahogany desk. A text message from her sister Pippa asking about lunch plans for the following week. Such a normal, everyday thing, yet it felt like a lifeline to her former life. She typed back quickly, suggesting they meet at their favorite cafe in Chelsea, then deleted the message. Even simple lunch dates required security arrangements and careful planning now. Kate set down her phone and walked to the window again. The morning was growing brighter, and she could see tourists gathering near the palace gates, hoping for a glimpse of royalty. Some held cameras, others waved small British flags. Their faces were filled with excitement and hope, the same expressions she had seen thousands of times during public appearances. These people looked up to her family, drew inspiration from their stability and dedication to service. The responsibility of that trust weighed heavily on her shoulders today. Whatever William was discussing with the Queen, whatever decision lay ahead, it would affect not just their family, but millions of people around the world who followed their every move. The thought was both humbling and terrifying. She remembered her wedding day, walking down the aisle of Westminster Abbey with the eyes of the world upon her. 2 billion people had watched that ceremony, but in that moment, all she could see was William waiting for her at the altar. His smile had given her strength then, just as his presence gave her strength now, even when he wasn't physically with her. Their marriage had weathered many storms, the intense media attention, the challenges of raising children in the public. The constant balancing act between duty and personal desires. Through it all, they had relied on each other, developing a silent language of glances and gestures that spoke volumes without words. Kate thought about the previous evening when William had stood on their apartment's balcony for nearly an hour, staring out at the London skyline. She had joined him silently, not asking questions, just offering her presence. He had reached for her hand without looking at her, and they had stood together in comfortable silence, watching the city lights twinkle in the darkness. The sound of footsteps in the corridor interrupted her thoughts. Kate recognized the measured pace immediately. William was returning. She didn't rush to greet him. Instead, she remained by the window, giving him space to process whatever had transpired during his meeting with the Queen. The door opened quietly, and she heard him enter the room. Still, she didn't turn around. This was part of their unspoken understanding. Sometimes words weren't necessary. Sometimes the most profound communications happened in silence. William crossed the room slowly, his footsteps soft on the Persian rug. Kate could feel his presence behind her, could sense the weight of whatever news he carried. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but steady. "Grandmother wants to see us both this afternoon," he said simply. Kate nodded, still facing the window. She had expected this. Royal decisions were rarely made in isolation. The Queen would want to gauge their readiness, their unity, before moving forward with whatever she had in mind. "The children?" Kate asked. "We'll stay with their tutors. This is just for us." Kate finally turned to face her husband. His blue eyes held a mixture of determination and uncertainty that she knew well. It was the same expression he had worn when he proposed, when he had decided to join the military, when he had chosen to speak publicly about his mother's death and its impact on his mental health. Without a word, she crossed the room and stood before him. They looked at each other for a long moment, communicating everything that needed to be said without speaking. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. That had always been their way, and it would continue to be their strength. The morning. Light had grown stronger now, filling the room with warmth and possibility. Outside, London was fully awake, bustling with the energy of another day. Inside the palace walls, two people who had chosen to dedicate their lives to service prepared to take another step forward on a journey that would define not just their future, but the future of the monarchy itself. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of understanding, commitment, and love that had grown stronger with each passing year. Today would bring new challenges, but they would meet them as they always had, together, with quiet strength and unwavering dedication to the roles destiny had chosen for them. The corridors of Buckingham Palace seemed longer than usual as William and Catherine walked side by side toward the Queen's private study. Their footsteps echoed softly on the polished floors, creating a rhythm that matched the steady beating of Kate's heart. She had been to countless meetings with the Queen over the years, but today felt different. The very air seemed charged with anticipation. William's hand briefly touched the small of her back as they approached the ornate double doors. It was a gesture so subtle that the security personnel flanking the entrance wouldn't have noticed. But Kate felt the warmth of his palm through the fabric of her navy dress. The touch lasted only a second, but it conveyed everything she needed to know. Whatever they were about to face, they were facing it together. The Queen's private secretary, a distinguished man in his 60s who had served the royal family for over 3 decades, opened the doors with practiced efficiency. "Their Royal Highnesses, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge," he announced formally, though they all knew such formality was unnecessary in this intimate setting. Queen Elizabeth sat behind her mahogany desk, the same one where she had conducted business for nearly 7 decades. At 96, she remained as sharp and commanding as ever, though Kate noticed the slight tremor in her hands as she set down her reading glasses. The room was exactly as Kate remembered from her first visit as an engaged woman. The family. Photographs arranged precisely on every surface, the carefully maintained flowers, the afternoon light streaming through windows that had witnessed countless historic moments. "Please, sit down," the Queen said, her voice carrying the authority that had guided a nation through decades of change. William and Catherine took their usual seats in the comfortable chairs facing the desk. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable, but expectant, like the moment before a conductor raises his baton. The Queen studied them both with eyes that had seen everything the modern world could offer. Her gaze lingered on Kate, and for a moment, the Duchess remembered her first solo engagement years ago, how nervous she had been, how the Queen had taken her aside afterward and told her quietly, "You did well, my dear. You understand what this means." Today, those same eyes held a different message. There was pride there, yes, but also something deeper. A recognition of the journey Kate had taken from that uncertain young woman to the poised royal she had become. More importantly, there was trust. "I have been thinking a great deal about the future," the Queen began, her words measured and deliberate. "About what our family means to this nation and to the Commonwealth. About legacy and continuity." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. "The world is changing rapidly, and we must be prepared to change with it while maintaining the values that have sustained us for generations." Kate felt William shift slightly in his chair beside her. She knew him well enough to recognize the signs of his growing tension, though to anyone else he would appear perfectly calm. His jaw was set in that particular way it always was when he was processing something significant. The Queen continued, her voice gaining strength. "Charles has been an exemplary heir, and he will make a fine king when the time comes. But I find myself looking beyond that transition, thinking about what comes next." Her eyes moved between William and Catherine. "You two represent something special. You have modernized this institution in ways that have brought us closer to the people we serve." Kate's mind raced back to their recent tour of the Caribbean. The conversations with young people about mental health, the visits to schools where children from all backgrounds had shared their dreams and aspirations. She thought about the way William had knelt to speak with a young boy who had lost his father. The silent tears she had wiped from her own eyes when she thought no one was watching. Your work with mental health awareness, with early childhood, development with environmental conservation, the Queen continued. These initiatives have shown the world that the monarchy can be both traditional and progressive. You have proven that we can honor our history while embracing our future. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting long shadows across the Persian carpet. Kate became acutely aware of every sound, the gentle ticking of the antique clock on the mantelpiece, the distant sounds of London traffic, the almost imperceptible whisper of the Queen's breathing. "I have made a decision," the Queen said, and something in her tone made both William and Catherine straighten in their chairs. "It is time to begin a more formal transition of responsibilities. Not immediately, but gradually over the coming months and years." Kate's breath caught in her throat. She had known this moment would come eventually, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that abstract future planning never could. Beside her, William remained perfectly still, though she could sense the intensity of his focus. "This means increased visibility, more significant duties, greater responsibility," the Queen explained. "It means preparing not just for your eventual roles, but for the interim period when you will serve as the primary representatives of the Crown while Charles and I step back from certain obligations." The implications hit Kate like waves against a shore. More public scrutiny, more time away from the children, more pressure to be perfect in every public moment. But also more opportunity to make a difference, to use their platform to address issues that mattered to them and to the people they served. "I need to know," the Queen said, leaning forward slightly, "that you are both prepared for what this means. That you understand the sacrifice it will require, not just from you, but from your children. That you are ready to put duty before personal preference in ways you have not yet been asked to do." The room fell silent again. Kate could feel the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. She thought about George, only 9 years old, but already showing signs of understanding his future role. She thought about Charlotte, so spirited, and independent, and little Louis with his infectious laughter. How would this decision shape their lives? William cleared his throat softly. "Grandmother," he began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment, "we have always understood that our private desires must serve the greater good. Catherine and I have discussed this possibility many times. We know what it would mean." Kate nodded, finding her voice. "We are honored by your confidence in us, Your Majesty. We understand the responsibility, and we accept it willingly." The words came easily, surprising her with their certainty. The Queen smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed her face. "I knew you would say that. It is why I have watched you both so carefully over the years, why I have been so pleased with your development as working royals. You understand that this is not about personal ambition, but about service to something greater than ourselves." She stood slowly, and William and Catherine rose with her. "We will discuss the details in the coming weeks. There will be meetings with advisors, adjustments to your schedules, new protocols to learn. But for now, I simply wanted you to know that the future of this institution rests in capable hands." As they prepared to leave, the Queen made one final observation. "The bond between you two is your greatest strength. Never underestimate the power of a unified front, of two people who trust each other completely. It is what will carry you through the challenges ahead." Walking back through the palace corridors, Kate and William maintained their composure until they reached the privacy of their car. Only then did William reach for her hand, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that spoke of shared purpose and mutual support. The die had been cast. Their future had been decided, not by them, but by the weight of tradition and duty that had shaped their lives from the moment they said "I do" in Westminster Abbey. As London rushed past their windows, they sat in comfortable silence, each processing the enormity of what lay ahead. The real test would come in the days and weeks that followed, as they began to understand what their new roles would demand of them and their family. But for now, in the quiet intimacy of their shared understanding, they were simply William and Catherine, husband and wife, facing the future together with the same quiet strength that had carried them this far. The family dinner at Anmer Hall felt different that evening. The Norfolk countryside stretched endlessly beyond the dining room windows, painted in the golden hues of late summer. This was their sanctuary, the place where they could simply be, a family without the weight of royal protocol pressing down on their shoulders. Yet tonight, even here, the conversation with the Queen cast long shadows over what should have been an ordinary meal. George sat at his usual place, methodically cutting his chicken into precise squares before eating each piece. At 9, he had developed particular habits that Kate recognized as his way of exerting control over his increasingly complex world. Charlotte, 7 and endlessly curious, kept glancing between her parents with the intuitive awareness that children possess when they sense important adult conversations happening just beyond their understanding. 5-year-old Louis remained, blissfully unaware of any tension, entertaining himself by making elaborate stories about his vegetables before eating them. His innocent chatter about carrots being brave soldiers and peas being tiny green dragons brought occasional smiles to his parents' faces, momentary breaks in the thoughtful silence that had settled over the family. William pushed his food around, his plate, much as he had done that morning at breakfast. Kate noticed his distraction and gently touched his foot under the table with hers, a small gesture of connection. He looked up and met her eyes, offering a brief smile that didn't quite reach his expression. "Daddy seems quiet tonight," Charlotte observed with the directness that made adults either laugh or feel uncomfortably exposed. She had inherited her great-grandmother's sharp eyes and her mother's ability to read people's emotions. William set down his fork and gave his daughter his full attention. "Just thinking about work, sweetheart," he said. though Kate could hear the inadequacy of the explanation even as he spoke it. "What kind of work?" George asked, looking up from his geometrically arranged dinner. Unlike his siblings, George had already begun to understand that his father's work was unlike other children's parents' jobs. He had started asking more sophisticated questions recently, questions that suggested he was beginning to grasp the magnitude of what lay ahead for him. Kate and William exchanged a look across the table. They had discussed this moment many times, the conversation they would eventually need to have with their children about the changing nature of their roles. They had simply expected to have more time to prepare. "Well," William began slowly, choosing his words carefully, "Granny Elizabeth has asked Mummy and me to help her with more of the things she does for the country. That means we might be a bit busier than usual." "Will you be away more?" Charlotte asked, and Kate heard the slight tremor in her daughter's voice. The children had grown accustomed to their parents' travel schedule, but they were also at ages where they needed consistency and presence. "We'll do our best to make sure one of us is always here when you need us," Kate said, reaching over to smooth Charlotte's hair. "And when we do have to travel, you'll have Maria and all the staff who love you very much." Louis, who had been building a tower with his remaining peas, suddenly looked up. "Can I come with you sometimes? I want to meet more people like last time." Kate smiled at the memory he was referencing. During their recent visit to Wales, Louis had charmed everyone he met, showing no signs of shyness despite the crowds and cameras. Unlike George, who was naturally more reserved, and Charlotte, who could be selective with her affections, Louis seemed to thrive on meeting new people. "Sometimes, yes," William said, "but there will be times when you'll need to stay here and focus on school and your activities." George, who had been listening intently to this exchange, set down his water glass with unusual force. "I don't want things to change," he said quietly, but with a firmness that reminded Kate startlingly of the Queen. The room fell silent except for the gentle ticking of the antique clock on the sideboard. Kate felt her heart constrict as she looked at her eldest son. He was so young to be grappling with concepts of duty and sacrifice, yet she knew that his unique position meant he would face these challenges throughout his life. "Change can be scary," Kate acknowledged, moving her chair closer to George's. "But it can also bring wonderful new opportunities. Think about when we moved from London to Norfolk. You were worried about leaving your friends and your room, remember?" George nodded slowly. "But then you discovered you loved having space to play football, and you made new friends at school, and you learned to ride properly," Kate continued. "Sometimes change brings us things we didn't know we needed." Charlotte, who had been unusually quiet during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. "Will people take more pictures of us?" It was a perceptive question that showed how much the children were already aware of their public status. Kate had noticed Charlotte becoming more conscious of cameras during recent outings, sometimes waving enthusiastically and other times hiding behind her parents. "Probably," William answered honestly. "But we'll always make sure you feel safe and comfortable, and you know you can always talk to us about anything that worries you." "I don't mind the cameras," Louis announced cheerfully, returning to his pea tower. "The people seem happy to see us." Kate and William couldn't help but smile at their youngest's uncomplicated view of their situation. His natural ease with public attention was already becoming apparent, and Kate wondered if he might grow up to be the most naturally gifted public figure among the three children. "What about school?" George asked, and Kate could hear the real worry in his voice. School was his refuge, the place where he was simply George Cambridge rather than the future king. His teachers and classmates treated him with the same expectations and boundaries as everyone else, and Kate knew he treasured that normalcy. "Nothing will change about school," William assured him. "You'll still go to the same classes, play with the same friends, do the same activities. The most important thing to us is that you have as normal a childhood as possible. Charlotte perked up at this. Can I still do ballet and tennis? Of course, Kate said. All your activities will continue, exactly as they are. The conversation continued as they finished dinner and moved to the sitting room for what had become their evening ritual. The children settled into their favorite spots. George in the large armchair by the window, Charlotte curled up on the sofa next to Kate, and Louis sprawled on the carpet with his collection of toy cars. As William read aloud from their current book, Kate found herself studying each of her children's faces in the warm lamplight. George's serious expression as he followed along with the story. Charlotte's dreamy smile as she imagined the characters. Louis's complete absorption in his quiet play while still listening to his father's voice. These were the moments she treasured most, the ordinary family times that grounded her in what truly mattered. Whatever increased responsibilities lay ahead, whatever sacrifices would be required, this foundation of love and security for their children had to remain unchanged. Later, after the children had been tucked into their beds and the house had settled into evening quiet, Kate and William sat together on the terrace overlooking the gardens. The Norfolk sky was vast and star-filled, unmarred by the light pollution that obscured such views in London. "Do you think we told them enough?" William asked, his voice carrying across the still air. "For now," Kate replied. "They're processing what we shared tonight. When they're ready for more details, they'll ask more questions." "George is worried," William observed. "George has always been sensitive to change, but he's also resilient. He'll adapt, just like he always has." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, each lost in their own thoughts about the future and what it would mean for their family. The sound of an owl calling from the ancient oak tree at the edge of the garden reminded them of the timeless nature of this place, the continuity that would remain constant even as their public roles evolved. "The children will be fine," Kate said finally, reaching for William's hand. "They have each other, they have us, and they have this." She gestured toward the peaceful scene before them. "No matter how much our public lives change, this stays the same." William squeezed her hand gently, finding comfort in her certainty. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and adjustments, but tonight they were simply parents who had navigated a difficult conversation with their children and emerged, with their family bonds intact. In the quiet of the Norfolk evening, surrounded by the security of their private world, that felt like enough. The first sign that something significant was happening came from an unexpected source. Maria Santos, their longtime housekeeper at Kensington Palace, noticed it first. She had worked for the royal family for 15 years, long enough to recognize the subtle shifts that preceded major announcements, the increased security briefings, the carefully coordinated scheduling adjustments, the way certain palace staff moved with heightened purpose through the corridors. More telling was the behavior of the International Press Corps. By Wednesday morning, photographers with telephoto lenses had taken up permanent positions across from the palace gates. The usual rotation of royal correspondents had been supplemented by senior editors and veteran journalists who only appeared for the most significant royal stories. Rebecca Walsh, royal correspondent for The Times, had covered the family for over a decade. She prided herself on understanding the subtle signals that preceded royal announcements. Something was definitely happening, though the palace press office remained frustratingly silent when she called for comment. "There's been a change in their diary management," she explained to her editor during their morning briefing. "Engagements that were scheduled months in advance are being quietly moved or canceled. Not canceled outright, mind you, but rescheduled, in ways that suggest they're making room for something bigger." Similar conversations were happening in newsrooms around the world. Royal watchers in Australia noticed that several planned Commonwealth engagements had been shifted to later dates. Canadian officials mentioned in passing that certain ceremonial events were being reconsidered. Small details that individually meant nothing, but collectively suggested something significant was in motion. Kate became aware of the increased attention during what should have been a routine visit to a children's hospital in Manchester. The crowd of photographers was larger than usual, their questions more insistent. Instead of the typical inquiries about the charity work or the children's activities, they pressed for comments about future plans, increased responsibilities, and the Queen's health. "Your Royal Highness, can you comment on reports of changes to your official duties?" one journalist called out as she finished her visit. Kate offered her practiced smile and the standard response. "We're always honored to serve in whatever capacity is needed." But she could feel the weight of their scrutiny differently than before. These weren't just routine questions. They were fishing for confirmation of something they suspected, but couldn't yet prove. Social media had already begun to buzz with speculation. Royal fan accounts analyzed every photograph for clues, dissecting body language and facial expressions for signs of change. A particularly observant Twitter user noticed that Kate's recent public appearances had included more formal elements than usual: longer receiving lines, more detailed briefings with officials, increased interaction with government representatives. The speculation intensified when eagle-eyed observers noticed that several senior royal staff members had been spotted entering Clarence House for extended meetings. Constitutional experts began appearing on television programs, discussing hypothetical scenarios about transitions of responsibility within the monarchy. Dr. Margaret Ashworth, a constitutional historian at Oxford University, found herself fielding calls from journalists around the world. "There are precedents for this kind of gradual transition," she explained during a BBC interview. "The current Queen herself took on increased responsibilities well before her father's death. It's a natural evolution, ensuring continuity and stability." But the real turning point came on Thursday evening when Kate and William attended a state dinner at Buckingham Palace for the President of France. Their entrance, typically a moment of elegant ceremony, carried additional weight. Observers noted the way the Queen briefly touched Kate's arm as introductions were made, a gesture that suggested private conversations and shared understanding. The French president's wife, known for her keen observation of diplomatic subtleties, later mentioned to her press secretary that the evening had felt different. "There was a sense of preparation about the Duke and Duchess," she said, "as if they were not just participating in the evening but studying it, learning from it in a way that suggested they would soon be leading such events themselves." Photography from the evening showed Kate and William in extended conversations with heads of state and diplomatic officials. Where they had previously participated in such discussions as interested observers, now they appeared to be taking more central roles. The body language was subtle but unmistakable to trained observers. International reaction began to coalesce around a shared understanding that the British monarchy was entering a new phase. Commonwealth prime ministers found themselves fielding questions about their relationships with the younger generation of royals. Palace officials in various countries began reaching out through diplomatic channels to understand what changes might be coming. The Australian Prime Minister's office issued a carefully worded statement expressing continued support for the monarchy and particular appreciation for the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge's engagement with Commonwealth issues. Similar statements followed from Canada and New Zealand, all phrased in language that suggested advanced knowledge of upcoming changes. Meanwhile, British political figures began positioning themselves appropriately. The Prime Minister's office let it be known that he had great confidence in the younger generation of royals and their understanding of modern governance. Opposition leaders echoed similar sentiments, creating the rare moment of bipartisan support that typically preceded significant royal transitions. The children's school was also affected by the increased attention. Head teachers found themselves dealing with more requests from media outlets for comments about the young princes and princess. Security arrangements were reviewed and quietly enhanced, though in ways designed to be invisible to the children themselves. George's teacher, Mrs. Harrison, noticed that her young student seemed more thoughtful than usual during their weekly check-in. When she gently asked if everything was all right at home, George considered the question seriously before answering. "Things are changing," he said with the gravity that adults found both charming and slightly concerning in such a young child. "But Mommy and Daddy say change can bring good things too." Mrs. Harrison made a note to keep a careful eye on all three Cambridge children in the coming weeks, understanding that their young lives were about to become even more scrutinized than they already were. Back at Kensington Palace, Kate found herself adapting to increased security protocols and expanded briefings. Her private secretary's schedule had become significantly more complex, with requests for meetings coming from organizations and individuals who had never sought access before. "It's as if everyone knows something is coming," her secretary observed during their daily planning meeting. "The level of interest has increased exponentially, even though nothing has been officially announced." William was experiencing similar changes. His military contacts mentioned increased interest from defense officials about his perspective on various issues. Environmental organizations were reaching out with more ambitious proposals, as if sensing that his platform might soon expand significantly. The international media attention reached a crescendo when a respected royal biographer published an article suggesting that major changes to royal duties were imminent. Without citing specific sources, the piece outlined a scenario remarkably similar to what Kate and William were actually preparing for. "This is not about illness or crisis," the article emphasized. "This is about planned, careful transition designed to ensure the monarchy's continued relevance and effectiveness in the 21st century. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge represent the future of the institution, and that future appears to be arriving sooner than many expected." Public reaction was largely positive. Polls showed strong support for increased roles for William and Kate, with particular enthusiasm for Kate's approach to issues like mental health and early childhood development. The public seemed ready for the change before it was even officially announced. As the speculation reached fever pitch, Kate and William maintained their usual public composure while privately marveling at how quickly word had spread despite their careful discretion. The world was watching, waiting, and preparing for an announcement that would reshape the public face of the British monarchy. The pressure of all this attention might have been overwhelming, but Kate found it oddly comforting. The speculation suggested that the public was ready for this transition, that the years of preparation and gradual assumption of responsibility had created confidence in their ability to take on greater roles. Standing at her window that evening, watching the photographers maintain their vigil across the street, Kate realized that the period of quiet preparation was ending. Soon, the world would know officially what they had already begun to suspect. The future was arriving, whether they felt ready or not. The morning of the announcement dawned gray and drizzly, typical October weather that seemed to match the weight of the moment ahead. Kate felt a surge of confidence at the Queen's words. The months of preparation, the gradual increase in responsibilities, the careful conversations with advisors and constitutional experts. All of it had led to this moment. She thought about the early days of her marriage, when every public appearance felt overwhelming, when she questioned whether she was capable of the role she had married into. Now, 12 years later, she knew she was ready. The formal announcement would be made in the throne room, a setting chosen deliberately for its symbolic weight. As they walked through the palace corridors toward that historic space, Kate reflected on all the moments that had brought them here. The wedding day, when she had promised to support William in his duties, not fully understanding what that would ultimately mean. The birth of their children, and the gradual realization that they were raising future kings and queens. The countless public engagements where they had learned to balance personal authenticity with royal dignity. The throne room doors opened to reveal a carefully selected gathering. Constitutional advisors, senior palace staff, representatives from the Commonwealth realms, and a small group of journalists who would relay the news to the world. The golden throne sat empty, as it would for many years to come, but its presence reminded everyone of the ultimate destination of this long journey. Prince Charles entered from a side door, his expression combining pride and solemnity. As the current heir to the throne, his support for this transition was crucial. He moved to stand beside his mother, creating a visual representation of the monarchy's continuity across generations. The Queen stepped forward to address the gathering, her voice carrying the authority that had guided the nation through decades of change. "Today marks an important evolution in the structure of our constitutional monarchy," she began. "After careful consideration and planning, we are announcing an expansion of responsibilities for the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, effective immediately." Kate felt William's presence beside her, solid and reassuring. They had practiced this moment, rehearsed their responses, but nothing could fully prepare them for the reality of hearing their future declared publicly and officially. Their Royal Highnesses have demonstrated exceptional dedication to public service and a deep understanding of the values that underpin our constitutional framework, the Queen continued. They will now assume increased responsibility for state functions, diplomatic engagements, and ceremonial duties, working in partnership with the Prince of Wales and myself to ensure seamless continuity of service to the British people and the Commonwealth. The formal language masked the personal significance of the moment. Kate remembered her conversation with the Queen months earlier, when she had been asked if she was prepared for what this role would require. Today, standing in the throne room with the weight of history around her, she knew her answer had been truthful. She was ready. Questions from the journalists were carefully managed, focusing on the practical implications of the change rather than personal feelings or family dynamics. William fielded inquiries about their international travel schedule with the diplomatic skill he had developed over years of public service. Kate responded to questions about balancing increased duties with their roles as parents, emphasizing their commitment to maintaining stability for George, Charlotte, and Louis. The announcement lasted less than 30 minutes, but Kate knew it would reshape their lives for decades to come. As they prepared to leave the throne room, the Queen approached them one final time. "The real work begins now," she said quietly. Her words meant only for them. "But I have complete confidence in your ability to serve with distinction." The journey back to Kensington Palace provided a brief respite before the full impact of the announcement would begin. Kate looked out at London rushing past their windows, seeing familiar streets with new eyes. This was their city now in a different way. Their responsibility in a manner that extended far beyond their previous roles. William reached for her hand as they sat in comfortable silence, processing what had just occurred. The gesture was simple, but significant. After all the formal ceremony and constitutional language, they were still the couple who had fallen in love at university, who had chosen to build a life together despite knowing it would mean sacrificing privacy and personal freedom for public service. "No regrets?" William asked softly, echoing a question he had posed on their wedding day. "None," Kate replied, and she meant it. The path ahead would be challenging, filled with scrutiny and responsibility that would test them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. But they would face it together, just as they had faced every challenge since that day they first met in their student accommodation. The palace gates came into view, and Kate could see the increased media presence, the crowds of well-wishers who had gathered despite the rain. Their new roles would mean more of this, more public attention, more demands on their time, more pressure to represent the monarchy flawlessly in every public moment. But it would also mean more opportunities to make a difference, to use their platform to address issues they cared deeply about, to modernize an ancient institution while preserving its essential character. The early childhood development initiatives Kate had championed could now reach a global scale. William's environmental work could influence policy at the highest levels. As they pulled into the palace courtyard, Kate saw Maria waiting by the entrance, her face beaming with pride and excitement. The staff had watched their employers grow into their roles over the years, had seen them develop from young newlyweds into confident public figures. Today's announcement was as much a validation of their journey as it was a beginning of something new. The rest of the day would be filled with congratulatory calls, briefings about their expanded schedule, and the 1,000 practical details that accompany any major change in royal duties. But for this moment, sitting in the car with William's hand in hers, watching the familiar scene of their home life, Kate allowed herself to feel pride in how far they had come and excitement about where they were headed. The gray morning had given way to afternoon sunshine, and through the palace windows, she could see the gardens where their children played, the normalcy they had fought so hard to preserve. That would continue, she was determined. No matter how much their public roles expanded, this foundation of family life would remain constant. The future stretched ahead, full of possibilities and responsibilities in equal measure. But Kate had learned that the most important moments often happened not in throne rooms or state ceremonies, but in quiet exchanges between two people who understood each other completely. Today had been one of those moments, not just the formal announcement, but the silent communication between her and William as they crossed the threshold into their new roles together. Stood in her dressing room at Kensington Palace, considering her wardrobe choices with unusual care. Today was not just another public appearance. It was the day that would mark a fundamental shift in their lives and in the monarchy itself. She selected a navy blue dress, elegant but not ostentatious, paired with her grandmother's pearl earrings. The choice was deliberate. Navy had become her signature color for important occasions, and the pearls connected her to family history while maintaining a sense of continuity. Every detail mattered today, as the world would analyze every aspect of their appearance for significance. William was already downstairs, reviewing his remarks one final time with his private secretary. He had been awake since 4:30, unable to sleep as his mind processed the magnitude of what they were about to announce. This morning would change everything, not just for them, but for their children, for the institution of the monarchy, and for the relationship between the crown and the British people. The children had been unusually quiet at breakfast. Even Louis, normally chattering constantly about his plans for the day, seemed to sense the gravity of the occasion. George asked twice if they would be home for dinner, seeking reassurance about continuity in small things when everything else felt uncertain. "We'll be back this afternoon," Kate had promised, kissing the top of his head. "And tonight we can watch that film you've been wanting to see." Charlotte hugged her mother extra tightly before leaving for school, whispering, "Good luck today, Mummy," with the intuitive understanding that something important was happening. The drive to Buckingham Palace felt longer than usual, though Kate knew it was simply her heightened awareness of time. Every familiar landmark along the route seemed significant today. The park where they often took the children, the memorial where William had left flowers for his mother, the gates through, which they had passed so many times before, but never for a moment quite like this. The palace was bustling with controlled activity. Staff members moved with the practiced efficiency that marked significant royal events, everyone understanding their role in the carefully choreographed proceedings ahead. Kate noticed additional security personnel, more television equipment than usual, and the unmistakable energy that preceded major announcements. Queen Elizabeth was waiting in the same study where she had first outlined her plans weeks earlier. Today she appeared even more composed than usual, dressed in a pale blue suit that complemented her sapphire brooch. Her posture conveyed the authority of 7 decades on the throne, but her expression held warmth as she greeted Kate and William. "Are you ready?" she asked simply. And Kate appreciated that there was no unnecessary drama in the question, no attempt to make the moment more weighty than it already was. "Yes, Your Majesty," William replied, his voice steady despite the enormity of what lay ahead. The Queen nodded approvingly. "Good. Remember, this is not about diminishing anyone's role, but about strengthening the institution we all serve. You have prepared well for this moment. Kate, 6 months after the announcement, Kate stood on the balcony of Government House in Sydney, watching the harbor sparkle in the Australian morning sun. This was their first major international tour in their expanded roles, and the significance was not lost on anyone involved. The crowds below were larger than any they had encountered before, the media coverage more extensive, the expectations higher. William joined her on the balcony, adjusting his tie before their next engagement. Even these small moments of preparation had taken on new weight. Every gesture, every choice of clothing, every facial expression would be analyzed by observers around the world as indicators of how the monarchy was evolving under their stewardship. "The speech went well this morning," he said, referring to Kate's address to the Early Childhood Development Summit. It had been her first major policy speech in her enhanced role, outlining initiatives that would span multiple Commonwealth countries. The response had been overwhelmingly positive, with Australian officials already committing to pilot programs based on her recommendations. Kate nodded, still processing the morning's events. Speaking to a room full of education ministers, development experts, and policymakers felt different now. Her words carried more weight. Her recommendations would influence government decisions affecting millions of children. The responsibility was both thrilling and sobering. Their private secretary appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand. "Your Royal Highnesses, the Prime Minister has arrived for your meeting." The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of adaptation. Their children had adjusted to their parents' increased travel, though not without challenges. George had gone through a difficult period when they missed his school play, despite their careful planning. Charlotte had started asking more questions about why their family was different from others. Louis, now 6, had begun to understand that cameras followed them everywhere for reasons beyond ordinary curiosity. But there had been remarkable moments, too. Kate's mental health initiative had received unprecedented funding from both government and private sources. William's environmental work had led to concrete policy changes in 3 Commonwealth countries. Together, they had hosted their first state visit, welcoming the President of South Korea with a ceremony that commentators described as flawlessly executed. The meeting with the Australian Prime Minister proceeded smoothly, focusing on trade relationships, climate change initiatives, and cultural exchanges. Kate found herself taking the lead on discussions about educational partnerships, while William addressed environmental policies and defense cooperation. The division of responsibilities felt natural, developed through months of working together in their new capacity. Later that afternoon, during a walkabout in central Sydney, Kate experienced one of those moments that reminded her why this role mattered. A young Aboriginal woman approached the barriers, holding a small child who couldn't have been more than 2 years old. "Your Royal Highness," the woman said, her voice carrying both shyness and determination. "I wanted to thank you for what you said about early childhood programs. My daughter has special needs, and the new support services have changed our lives." Kate crouched down to speak with the child, who reached out tiny fingers to touch the Duchess's pearl necklace. The moment was captured by dozens of cameras, but Kate was focused entirely on the family before her. This was why the increased responsibility felt worthwhile, the ability to influence policies that made real differences in individual lives. The tour continued with visits to environmental research stations, meetings with Commonwealth officials, and cultural events that celebrated the deep ties between Britain and Australia. Each engagement revealed new aspects of their evolved roles. They were no longer simply visiting as representatives of the monarchy, they were there as future leaders who would shape the relationship between these nations for decades to come. The Australian press had been particularly welcoming, with editorial writers praising their approach to modernizing royal protocols while maintaining respect for tradition. One newspaper headline read, "The future is here," accompanied by photographs of Kate and William engaging with young entrepreneurs and environmental scientists. On their final evening in Sydney, they attended a reception at the Opera House. The Sapi, iconic venue, with its distinctive sail-like architecture silhouetted against the harbor, provided a stunning backdrop for what had become a celebration of both achievement and potential. The guest list included leaders from across Australian society, politicians, business figures, artists, scientists, and community advocates. As Kate moved through the reception, she was struck by the quality of conversation she was having. People were bringing her complex policy proposals, seeking her input on international initiatives, treating her as someone whose opinion could influence significant decisions. During his speech that evening, William reflected on the tour's significance. Catherine and I came to Australia not just as visitors, but as partners in building the future relationships between our nations. The conversations we've had this week, the commitments made, the partnerships formed, these will shape policy and practice for years to come. Kate added her own remarks, focusing on the personal connections that had made the tour meaningful. We've met extraordinary people doing remarkable work, from the researchers developing new approaches to childhood learning disabilities to the entrepreneurs creating sustainable technologies. Australia is showing the world what's possible when innovation meets determination. The applause that followed felt different from the polite appreciation they had grown accustomed to during previous tours. This was recognition of substance, acknowledgement that their visit had produced concrete outcomes rather than merely ceremonial moments. Flying back to London, Kate and William had time to process what the tour had revealed about their new roles. The increased responsibility was demanding, requiring deeper preparation and more sophisticated understanding of complex issues. But it was also incredibly fulfilling in ways their previous duties had not been. The children are going to want to hear about everything, William observed as they reviewed photographs from the week. The images showed them engaged in serious policy discussions, playing with children at a development center, examining coral reef research, and meeting with indigenous elders who shared traditional knowledge about environmental stewardship. Kate smiled, thinking about the stories they would share at family dinner. George would be fascinated by the environmental research. Charlotte would want to hear about the children they had met, and Louis would be entertained by tales of the various animals they had encountered at conservation sites. But there would be stories they couldn't share, conversations that touched on sensitive diplomatic issues or confidential policy discussions. This was another aspect of their evolved roles, the weight of information that came with increased access to government decision-making. As London appeared below them, Kate reflected on how much had changed since that morning 6 months earlier, when they had driven to Buckingham Palace for the announcement. The increased scrutiny had been challenging, with every decision analyzed for broader significance. The expanded travel schedule had required careful coordination to maintain family stability. The deeper involvement in policy discussions had demanded intensive briefings and study, but they had also discovered capabilities they didn't know they possessed. Kate's confidence in addressing complex policy issues had grown enormously. William's ability to facilitate difficult diplomatic conversations had impressed seasoned officials. Together, they had developed a working partnership that complemented their personal relationship while serving the broader purposes of the monarchy. The plane touched down at Heathrow just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded Kate of the Sydney harbor they had left that morning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, briefings about their upcoming visit to Canada, planning sessions for domestic engagements, and the constant work of balancing public duty with private family life. But tonight, they would go home to Kensington Palace, where 3 children waited to hear about their parents' adventures. Kate would help Charlotte with her reading, William would review George's mathematics homework, and they would both listen to Louis's elaborate stories about his week with the nanny and tutors. These ordinary moments of family life remained their anchor, the foundation that made all the public responsibility bearable and meaningful. No matter how much their roles expanded, how many countries they visited, or how many policy initiatives. They launched. Coming home to their children's voices and bedtime routines kept them grounded in what truly mattered. The silent exchange that had begun that morning in Kate's study, the wordless communication between two people facing an uncertain future together, had evolved into something deeper. They had become true partners in service, individuals who had grown into roles they never could have imagined when they first met as university students. The doors had indeed parted, revealing a future neither had anticipated, but both were ready to embrace.